The savannah looked calm that morning. Golden grass moved softly under the wind, birds crossed the pale sky, and sunlight spread across the open land as if nothing could disturb it. But on the plains, peace can disappear in a single moment. One mistake, one burst of confusion, one step in the wrong direction, and the world turns from open space into a trap. That was the danger facing a baby elephant named Neo on the day his life nearly ended. He was tiny, frightened, and completely alone. Around him, lions were already closing in. And far beyond the dust, a figure no herd expected to see again was walking back toward the place he had left behind years before. Neo was barely 6 months old, still awkward in the way young calves often are. With oversized ears, uncertain legs, and a short trunk he had not fully learned to control. Earlier that morning, the herd had been moving between feeding grounds, following a worn route through scattered acacias and dry scrub toward a distant water source. Then something startled them near a shallow channel. Branches cracked, adults shifted, dust rose. For the herd, it lasted only seconds. For Neo, it changed everything. In the confusion, he drifted away from the adults and lost sight of the gray bodies that had always surrounded him. By the time the dust settled, the plains were empty. He called for his mother at once, then again, then louder. Each cry came sharper, thinner, more desperate, rising into the morning and then vanishing into the open silence. No answer came back. Only wind, only grass, only the terrible stillness that tells a young animal the world has gone too wide. But the world had heard him. Hidden beyond a low rise, lionesses were already watching. They had likely seen the separation before Neo even understood what had happened. On the savannah, predators do not always rush. Sometimes the most efficient hunt is the one that tightens slowly. One lioness stepped out first, moving with that controlled calm only a top predator can carry. Then another emerged from the opposite side. Then another. Neo turned from one shape to the next, confused, trembling, backing away without knowing where safety had gone. He pressed himself against a termite mound as if hard earth could protect him. His trunk lifted and dropped wildly. His legs shook so badly he nearly folded beneath himself. He cried again, but this time the sound was different. There was no hope in it now, only fear. The lionesses kept closing in. They did not charge. They spread. One drifted wider to the left. Another slipped around to narrow his last opening. More movement stirred in the grass behind them. It was not chaos. It was structure. A patient enclosure. The kind of pressure that turns panic into paralysis before the first strike is made. Neo had no chance on his own. He was too young to outrun them, too small to intimidate them, too far from the herd to be heard in time. One lioness crouched low, shoulders tightening. Another edged into position. The calf stumbled, nearly falling. For a few horrible seconds, the whole plain felt frozen around him. Even the air seemed to hold itself still. Then the ground changed. At first, it was only a faint tremor beneath Neo's feet, subtle enough to feel unreal. But the vibration grew stronger. Dust lifted from the earth. Pebbles shifted. A flock of birds burst out of a thorn tree all at once and scattered across the sky. The lionesses froze. Their eyes moved off the calf. Something heavy was coming. From the southern trail, through a curtain of dust and pale light, a lone elephant stepped onto the open ground. He was enormous. Older than the prime bulls that often fought near water, darker than the dust around him, and marked by the hard evidence of a solitary life. One tusk curved longer than the other. The second was chipped and blunt near the end, as if some violent clash years earlier had taken part of it away. His ears were torn at the edges. Faded scars crossed his shoulders and flanks. Yet none of those marks weakened him. They gave him weight, presence, history. This was Kellen. Long ago he had been part of the wider elephant community that moved through these plains. Known to the older cows, remembered as a fierce young bull who once stood his ground against drought rivals and long dry marches between waterholes. But adult males do not remain at the center of family herds forever. As they grow, they drift away, moving into lives of distance, independence, and risk. Some return now and then, others vanish into routes the herd no longer follows. Kellen had become one of those absences, a name carried only in memory, a giant swallowed by the horizon. No one expected him to come back, least of all here, least of all now. Kellen stopped only once. He lifted his trunk and drew in the scent of dust, fear, and lions. His ears spread wide. He looked at the ring around the calf, then at Neo himself, trembling against the mound, too young to understand that something impossible had just appeared between him and death. The lead lioness hesitated. She had expected a helpless calf, not a full-grown bull with the mass of a moving wall. For one stretched second, predator and giant held the clearing in silence. Then Kellen advanced. His first steps were slow, deliberate, crushing grass flat beneath his feet. Then all at once, he surged forward and released a trumpet so violent it tore across the plain like thunder. Dust exploded around his legs. The lionesses broke formation instantly. One leapt backward, another spun into the grass. A third held her ground too long and then retreated as Kellen charged straight through the center of the circle, head high, ears wide. Every movement carrying a message no lion could misunderstand. He did not need to strike them. He only needed to arrive. Within seconds, the ring was gone. The perfect shape of the hunt collapsed into scattered golden bodies vanishing into brush and shadow. The clearing that had looked like Neo's grave now belonged to the old bull. Kellen slowed only after the last lioness had retreated beyond immediate reach. He stood there, chest rising, ears half spread, eyes fixed on the grass until the final trace of movement disappeared. Neo did not run. He simply stood there shaking, too overwhelmed even to cry. Kellen turned toward him, lowered his trunk, and rested it gently across the calf's back. That was the moment that changed everything. Not the charge, not the trumpet, not the way the lions had fled. It was the touch. Neo leaned into him almost at once, as if his body recognized safety before his mind could. He pressed himself against Kellen's front leg, trying to disappear into the shape of the animal that had arrived out of nowhere. For the first time since losing the herd, the calf fell silent. From a rocky ridge above the clearing, Ranger Asha had seen it all. She worked with a small wildlife team that monitored elephant movement across the region, especially during the harsher months when predator pressure intensified around shrinking resources. Through her field binoculars, she had watched the lionesses close in and had already understood how scenes like that usually ended. A calf alone on open land rarely got a second chance. But what happened below her was something else entirely. An old solitary bull, long absent from the herd's life, had answered a cry that was not meant for him and stepped into danger without hesitation. And then he did something even stranger. He stayed. Kellen did not rescue Neo and walk away. He remained beside the calf through the heat of the afternoon, guiding him out of exposed ground and into a line of thicker brush where shade and cover made ambush harder. He slowed his pace so Neo could keep up. When the calf veered off in fear, Kellen turned him back with a nudge. When Neo froze, Kellen waited. It was not random movement. It looked purposeful, steady, almost instructional. Stay here. Move now. Not that direction. Stay close. As evening cooled the air, Asha continued watching from a safe distance. Kellen led Neo along narrow game paths, through shallow depressions where scent drifted poorly, and past thorn clusters that forced any predator to reveal itself before closing in. He chose the route like an animal that had spent years surviving alone and had learned every advantage the land could offer. When darkness came, he positioned himself between the calf and the open plain. Neo tucked himself close to the old bull's side and slept. By dawn, the herd still had not found them. That second day revealed something more astonishing than the rescue itself. Kellen was not merely tolerating the calf. He had fully taken on the role of protector. When jackals wandered too near, he drove them back with presence alone. When Neo lagged, distracted by scent or sound, Kellen guided him forward. He led the calf toward a muddy seep hidden under cracked earth and stood guard while he drank. Again and again, the old bull adjusted his movements to the weakness of the young one beside him. Asha knew enough about elephant society to understand how unusual it was. Calves belong within a network of mothers, sisters, and aunts. Protection usually comes from the core of the family, not from an isolated adult bull moving outside of it. Yet that was exactly what she was watching now. On a harsh plain full of predators, one male who had long ago drifted out of herd life had chosen to become a shield. By midday, circling vultures far off beyond a stony ridge hinted at predator activity nearby. Asha worried the same pride might still be following them, waiting for a tighter place, a weaker moment, a better angle. She was right. Late that afternoon, as Kellen and Neo moved through a narrow rocky pass bordered by thorn scrub and uneven stone, the ambush came. This time the lions did not use the open plains. They used the terrain. One appeared high on the slope. Another moved low through brush below. A third slipped forward from behind a boulder, its eyes fixed on the calf trailing a few steps behind the bull. Neo froze. The pass was too narrow for an easy turn and too rough for the calf to run fast. The lion above dropped lower. The lion below edged forward. For a second, all the terror of the first attack came crashing back into the calf's body at once. Kellen reacted instantly. He wheeled with explosive force and drove his full weight into the center of the pass. His trumpet struck the rocks and came back twice as loud. One lion lunged, perhaps hoping to force the calf into confusion, but Kellen met it with a sweeping blast of his head that sent dust and stones flying. Another tried to use the higher slope, only to stop when the old bull surged uphill with a speed that looked impossible for an animal his size. This was no warning display now. No measured bluff. This was full commitment. Direct. Relentless. Final. The lions broke. They scattered over rock and through brush in 3 directions, each of them abandoning the attack before Kellen could close the distance enough to do real damage. He pursued just far enough to make the price of returning obvious, then stopped and turned back at once. Neo was still there, rigid and trembling, trunk curled tight against his chest. Kellen crossed the gap and stood over him until the shaking eased. Only then did they move again. From her ridge, Asha lowered her binoculars and exhaled slowly. Now she understood that the first rescue had not been a burst of accidental aggression or a random reaction to noise. It was protection. Deliberate, repeated, chosen. Whatever road had taken Kellen away from the herd years before, something in that lonely calf had called him back across it. Near sunset on the 3rd day, the answer finally came. At first it was only a sound. Deep contact rumbles rolling faintly through the plains. Then louder, then closer. Neo lifted his head so quickly his whole body seemed to rise with it. He called back with an urgency that was no longer hopeless, only desperate to be heard. Grass moved ahead. Grey bodies appeared one by one. Adult females emerged tense and scanning, then quickened when they saw the calf alive between the stems. Neo ran. The reunion was immediate and overwhelming. Trunks reached over his back, his head, his sides, checking him, confirming him, almost smothering him with relief. One female, likely his mother, pulled him into the center of her body and held him there with a force that looked almost painful in its intensity. The rest of the herd closed around them at once, a living wall of dust, muscle, and protection. And just outside that circle stood Kellen. He did not try to enter. He did not force himself into the family space he had left behind. He remained a little apart, carrying the distance of years in the way he held himself. But the matriarch saw him. She stepped forward slowly, studying the bull who had come back from absence marked by scars, drought, solitude, and the hard shape of time. For a long moment, the plains went quiet again. Then she reached out her trunk. Kellen met it. The touch was brief, quiet, and impossible to misread. It was not sentimental. It was not theatrical. It was acknowledgement. The exiled bull who had vanished into the southern plains had returned when one of theirs needed him most. As the last light spread red over the savannah, Kellen turned away from the herd. Neo watched from the safety of his mother's side. For one brief moment, the calf stepped forward as if he might follow. Then he stopped. He no longer needed rescue. What he needed had already been given. Kellen walked south until the tall grass began to swallow his shape. The plains that had once taken him away now received him again, but not as a forgotten shadow. He left behind something stronger than memory. He left behind proof that even in the wild, where survival is usually decided by timing, strength, and luck, there are moments that feel larger than instinct alone. That morning, the lions had seen only a helpless calf. What they did not see was that the past was already coming back through the dust. And when it arrived, it came in the form of an exiled giant who chose without hesitation to stand between a lost baby and the end of its story.